At flipsidegaming.com, you can use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10, including the exclusive Richard Kane Ferguson playmats featuring art such as the memorable Dakon Blackblade, so get yours today. Hello and welcome to another sealed deck building exercise. Today we're taking a look at the latest set, which is Dominaria. So we'll be opening 6 packs and then building a 40 card sealed deck. So first things first, let's open all the boosters and go through them. And at the same time I'll be sorting the cards by color to make it easier. Alright. In our first pack we open Deep Freeze, Fervent Strike, Sarah Disciple, Grow from the Ashes, Blessing of Beltenlock, Power Stone Shard, Sheevan Fire, Call the Cavalry, Llanowar Elves, Sparring Construct, first uncommon is Skizzik, then a Damping Sphere, Wild Onslaught, and our rare is Marwyn, the Nurturer. Alright. Second pack, where we start with another Deep Freeze, Skirk Prospector, Davenant Trapper, Windgrace Acolyte, Pierce the Sky, Pardic Wanderer, Saproling Migration, Jousting Lance, Run Amok, Blink of an Eye, then Time of Ice as our first uncommon, Orcish Vandal, Sage of Latnam, and our rare is Avra. Alright. Pack number 3. Where we have a Warlord's Fury, a Knight of New Benalia, Befuddle, Stronghold Confessor, Crozen Druid, Skittering Surveyor, Primordial Worm, Academy Drake, Demonic Vigor, Power Stone Shard, Icy Manipulator as our first uncommon, another Wild Onslaught, Board the Weatherlight, and our rare is Joyra, Weatherlight Captain. Alright. On to pack number 4. Where we have another Skirk Prospector, Sergeant at Arms, Coldwater Snapper, Bloodstone Goblin, Rat Colony, Short Sword, Pegasus Courser, Blessed Light, Broken Bond, Nature's Spiral, then a Juggernaut, and our rare is Cabal Stronghold, and we still get a legendary, which is Shanna, Cisei's Legacy, and even a foil. Nice. And a normal legendary, Danitha. Alright, so 2 legendaries in 1 pack. Time for booster number 5, where we have Artificer's Assistant, Keldon Warcaller, Healing Grace, a Llanowar Scout, Cabal Paladin, Adventurous Impulse, Soul Salvage, Yavimaya Sap Herd, Aesir Glider, Fight with Fire as our first uncommon, On Sarah's Wings, Diligent Excavator, and our rare is a Foil Divest, and our rare is a Grand Warlord Rada. Alright. Where we start with an Opt, Gitu Journey Mage, Invoke the Divine, a Llanowar Envoy, another Rat Colony, Sapperling Migration, another Blink of an Eye, Seismic Shift, Aven Sentry, Cabal Evangel, Song of Freyalise as our first uncommon, then a Goblin Barrage, and then a Karn's Temporal Sundering, which leaves us with a legendary Halar the Firefletcher. Alright. Now it's time to go over every color, kind of take a look at how many creatures we have in each color, how many removal spells, to kind of get an idea how deep each color is, and then we'll try and make different color combinations to see how they work together. So we'll be right back. Alright, so I've already sorted each color by creatures and non-creatures to kind of get an idea of how each color works. So let's take a look at white, which is one of our deepest colors. We've got not a ton of removal in white, just the Blessed Light and to a lesser extent Invoke the Divine. We do have a powerful On Sarah's Wings, which can steal a game by itself. And then taking a look at our white creatures, we've got a reasonable curve of creatures. I've also put the Call the Cavalry in the creature pile here, same with the Sapperling Migrations in green. So we've got some OK 2-drops, some OK 3-drops. Danitha is exciting, Call the Cavalry, Haven, and then Evra. So white looks okay, it's lacking removal, but the creatures are all fine, and they support a more aggressive kind of deck. So I think white is pretty likely to make its way into our final build. Then taking a look at blue, the non-creatures, we have 2 copies of Blink of an Eye to Deep Freeze, so that's a nice bit of removal if we can pair those with maybe flyers to fly over the Deep Freeze. Befuddle is probably not going to get played. Time of Ice is nice if we're a more aggressive deck. Karn's Temporal Sundering is interesting, don't know if we'll have enough legendaries to support it. I would want at least 4 or 5 legendaries to feel comfortable with the Temporal Sundering. But the creatures in blue are kind of lackluster. The only exciting ones are Academy Drake and then to a lesser extent Coldwater Snapper. So blue needs a lot more creatures if we want to make these Blink of an Eyes and Deep Freeze work. So that's going to be pretty challenging. So despite the double Blink, double Deep Freeze, I don't think blue's very likely to make it in the final build, since Blink of an Eye is not really a card you want to splash, since you want to really kick the Blink of an Eye to get full value, which is double blue. And just splashing a Deep Freeze doesn't seem great. So blue is unlikely to make it to the final deck here. Let's move on to black, where we have no removal essentially in the non-creature slots. Just a Divest, which I'm not interested in playing, and then Soul Salvage can be okay, but it's not going to deal with the opponent's problems. And then 2 mediocre kind of tricks or pump spells. And then the creatures are also very lackluster. The only ones I'm excited to play are the Confessor and the Windgrace Acolyte. So black, very unlikely to make it into the final deck. Let's move on to red, where we have, alright, we have some reasonable removal here in red. We've got a Sheevan Fire, which is exciting. We've got a Fight with Fire, and a Goblin Barrage, so all quality removal spells. We also have some pump spells to get our creatures through if we're trying to be more aggressive on the ground. But then the creatures in red are a bit lackluster. Double Skirk Prospector I'm not interested in. I'm not interested in playing the Vandal most of the time. Bloodstone Goblins, mostly just a 2-mana 2/2. Same with the Warcaller. We've got a Journey Mage, but it doesn't look like we'll have a ton of Wizards. And then a Skizzik. So red has some good removal, but is also lacking in the creature department. Let's move on to green, which is kind of gonna have to be our saving grace here, but looking at green, it's one of our deeper colors. In the non-creature spells, we have Adventurous Impulse, which is fine. Pierce the Sky, more of a sideboard card. Same with Broken Bond, even though I don't dislike main decking one Disenchant effect in my sealed decks especially. Then Song of Freyalise is one of the more exciting non-creature spells here. And then Grow from the Ashes means we have a bit of fixing, since we also have the Prospector in the colorless slot, which can help us fix our mana, so splashing is definitely an option with this pool. And also Double Wild Onslaught, which will go very well with our Sapperling Migrations, which we opened 2 copies of. We've got Llanowar Elves, which is exciting. We've got a Marwyn, which I don't think we'll end up playing, since it doesn't look like we have enough Elves to really make her work. A Sapherd is always fine, Frozen Druid is fine, and then Primordial Worm just as kind of a top-end card if we don't have any other ones. So green definitely looks playable with the double Sapperling Migration, Llanowar Elves, double Wild Onslaught, Grow from the Ashes, Song of Freyalise. So kind of a token build looks very promising in green. And then taking a look at the colorless cards, we've got some nice equipment, Jousting Lance and Short Sword. I'm usually interested in playing if the deck is a little bit more aggressive with lots of creatures, and especially paired with tokens. A Jousting Lance can do a lot of work. Damping Sphere is never going to make the cuts in limited. Double Powerstone Shard is interesting, don't know if we'll end up needing those, but then Icy Manipulator is an awesome card, and we're always going to end up playing this one. And then in the creature slots we have a Juggernaut, which can be quite good, and a Skittering Surveyor, which we're always going to play as a nice mana fixing card that gets us some value as well. And a Glider if we're ending up in a more aggressive deck. And then the Wanderer, which I'm not too interested in most of the time. So yeah, some nice equipment we can play, and then of course Icy Manipulator, and then maybe a Juggernaut, and of course the Surveyor. Then taking a look at our multicolor cards, which can also be an indication in which colors you should try to go in. We've got 2 red-green ones, which are quite playable, and Shanna is also exciting if we end up in a more token-heavy deck. And then Joyra, which is also definitely worth building around if you have a lot of playable historic spells to start with. So they all kind of deserve to maybe be built around a little bit. So we'll see if we can maybe make all these different decks work, and then we can compare them to see which one's going to be a little bit better than the other ones. And finally we also have a Cabal Stronghold, but given that black is almost unplayable, I don't think we'll end up needing this Cabal Stronghold. So I think we can definitely get rid of the black cards, since there's no world where I'll need the black cards in this pool, so we can just get rid of them, since it's going to make it easier to build our other decks. Then blue deserves a little bit of consideration here, since we do have Joyra, we do have Temporal Sundering, which maybe we can build around, and then a decent number of non-creature spells. So I'm not going to discard blue yet, even though it's unlikely that we end up playing blue. So first things first, I think I want to try and build maybe a red-green deck or a green-white deck, see how those look like. Maybe we can play a green-white deck splashing red thanks to our Grow from the Ashes and Skittering Surveyor. That's certainly an option, since red had some splashable removal spells which we can easily support. So I think we'll start with a green-white deck splashing red and see how that looks like, and then afterwards we can maybe build some other decks as well to try and compare them. So we'll be right back. Alright, welcome back. So these are all the cards I would consider playing in the green-white splash red deck, and as you can see we've got way more than enough playable cards, which is a nice problem to have, since we get to kind of shave the least powerful cards. Then quickly going over the cards we're not playing in these colors, just so you have an idea. We're not playing Knight of New Benalia and Sarah Disciple. They're fine 2-drops, but I don't think 2-drops are super important in the sealed format, and they're a little bit underwhelming on power level. Then Invoke the Divine can be a fine main deck card. I don't think it's necessary, especially since the power level in this deck is quite high, so we can afford to kind of run Invoke the Divine as a sideboard card, just in case our opponent doesn't have a ton of targets for it. Healing Grace is just a mediocre combat trick, and I think we can do better. And then Border Weatherlight requires quite a few hits for us to be able to run the Border Weatherlight, so we'd rather not run the risk of missing. And then in green, we've got a Nature Spiral, which can be fine, but I don't think we'll need it. Marwyn, we don't really have enough elves to make her work. Llanowar Scout is not super appealing for me. Being able to ramp is nice, but you quickly run out of lands, and then the Scout is just a 2-mana 1/2, which is not that exciting. Pierce the Sky is a nice sideboard card, don't think we need to main deck it. Same with Broken Bond. And then Halar can be a nice card in a red-green deck, but as a splash card, a 3-mana 3/3 with Trample is not that exciting, so I don't think it's worth splashing for Halar, as opposed to Grand Warlord Rada, which may be worth it as a splash card. Then Aster Glider is fine in a more aggressive deck, don't think we'll need it here, but just a card you could play in some sealed decks, especially in the more aggressive ones. And then Pardic Wanderer can also be a playable card, but I don't think we'll need it here. So then going over to the cards that are currently laid out. So right now we have 31 cards laid out in front of us, and I think the final build of the deck is going to include 17 lands and 23 spells, especially since we have Llanowar Elves, Grow from the Ashes, and Skittering Surveyor for additional mana fixing and mana ramp, so we won't need the 18th land, but that still means we need to make 8 cuts here. So let's see. In the 1-drops we have Llanowar Elves, which is not getting cut. Then in the 2-drops we have Migration and Shanna. Those aren't getting cut, especially since we can also kick the Migration later in the game for more value. Then in the 3-drops we have quite a few cards, and some of those can definitely get cut. We've got a Llanowar Envoy, which can provide some mana fixing, but it's pretty weak mana fixing, and I don't think we'll need it, especially since we're not playing Marwyn, so we won't need the Elf type. And then Crozen Druid is a fine card, can gain you a ton of life in the late game, and that can be very nice against the more aggressive decks. Can kind of treat it as a sideboard card that we can maybe bring in against the more aggressive decks, but we don't necessarily need to start it. Then I'm very glad to be playing the Sapherd, since we have a few token synergies with Song of Freyalise, Wild Onslaught, and Shanna, so definitely want to play the Sapherd. Pegasus Courser is also too good not to include. Davenant Trapper is a fine card, maybe we don't need it here. We will have a few ways to trigger the Davenant Trapper to maybe tap down an opposing creature here or there, but I don't think the Davenant Trapper is all that necessary for this deck, so we can also cut that one. Danitha is very good. Sergeant at Arms I kind of like in this build, since we have kind of a token sub-theme, so if we ever get to kick the Sergeant at Arms at 6 mana, it can provide a few more tokens, so it's also just a nice late game card in case we end up flooding out a little bit. And then I'm definitely playing the Skittering Surveyor if we're trying to splash red here for removal. So the 3-drops look pretty good here. Then going over to the 4-drops, we have Call the Cavalry, which is fine as a way to make some tokens. We've got an Aven Sentry as a nice evasive creature to close out the game if there's a ground stall. Juggernaut seems like a fine addition here, since we have a few ways to help our creatures get through for damage with our equipment and pump spells. So I think Juggernaut is a fine addition in this deck. And then the question is it worth splashing Grand Warlord Rada? It's a 4-mana 3/4 with haste, which is quite good, and then the ability, especially combined with our tokens to generate extra mana, can be very useful. But I could definitely see cutting the Grand Warlord Rada, since it's not the most exciting splash card ever, and maybe we just don't need it here. And then at the 6-drops we have a Primordial Worm, which is unexciting, it's just a big body that we might be able to ramp into, and then Evra, so might end up cutting the Worm here. We'll see how many more cuts we need to make. Then over to the 1-drops we have Adventurous Impulse, which is a fine card, but can definitely get cut since it's pretty low impact, so if we need to make more room, can definitely cut the Impulse, even though it can help us smooth out our draws to a certain extent in helping us find our splash color. But given that we have already Skittering Surveyor and Grow from the Ashes as a way to find our splash color, I don't think we'll need the Adventurous Impulse here. Then we have a Short Sword, which I'm usually a fan of, but maybe in this deck, since we have a lot of 1/1 tokens, giving them +1/+1 might not really be enough to get through. So I could see cutting the short sword since we already have a Jousting Lance and double Wild Onslaught to pump our creatures, so maybe we don't need the short sword in this exact build. Then Song of Freyalise is amazing in this deck, especially with all the token generation that's going on. And then Jousting Lance is probably the better equipment here to attach onto our tokens. And then definitely want to play the Grow from the Ashes if we're trying to splash red as a nice ramp spell and a way to fix our mana. And then Fight with Fire is an amazing late game card if we ever get double red, and just a very good removal spell at 3 mana, letting us get rid of any problematic creature on the other side. Then in the 4-drops we have Icy Manipulator, which is never getting cut. And then double White Onslaught, which is a very nice way to kind of overrun your creatures to a certain extent. Don't know if we'll need both of them, but I'm definitely playing one since it combines so well with our tokens. And then a Goblin Barrage, which is another nice removal spell, 4 mana to deal 4 damage, and if we sacrifice an artifact we can also deal 4 damage to the opponent, which can be relevant. So I think we'll play the Goblin Barrage here. And then we also have an On Sarah's Wings, which typically is a very nice way to kind of steal games that you're otherwise losing. But in this particular build, where we have so many tokens and kind of low-powered creatures, I don't think we'll end up needing the On Sarah's Wings, also because the card quality in the deck is already pretty high. I don't think we need to expose ourselves to potentially getting 2-for-1'd by the opponent. But normally On Sarah's Wings can do a lot of work, especially if you are blue-white and maybe have a Cold Water Snapper in your pool. And finally we also have a Blessed Light and a Sheevan Fire, which we're often going to be casting for 5 mana, as we're splashing red, so we're unlikely to have a red mana in our opening hand, but later in the game being able to pay 5 mana to deal 4 damage to a creature is still very good. So it's kind of an instant speed 5 mana Goblin Barrage. And then of course Blessed Light is amazing as well. So let's see how many cards we still have left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 creatures. So that's a reasonable amount. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 non-creatures. So that leaves us with 22 cards. So now we just have to decide which our last card is going to be, and we have a few options to choose from. Can play the second copy of Wild Onslaught. We do have a reasonable amount of token generators here. Double Cyberling Migration. We've got Yavimaya Sapherd, which makes 2 creatures. We've got Sergeant at Arms, which we can kick, and Call the Cavalry. So Wild Onslaught does look pretty powerful in our deck. The only concern is that we are relatively light on the number of creature cards, so that does make Wild Onslaught a bit worse than it could normally be if we have more creatures. We've got Davenant Trapper, which looks pretty appealing in this deck since we have a reasonable number of historic cards. We've got Song of Freyalise, Jousting Lance, Shanna, Danatha, Scaring Surveyor, Juggernaut, Icy Manipulator, and Evra, so that's a pretty high number of historic cards to trigger the Trapper, and that would also add an extra creature to the deck, so that makes the Wild Onslaught we already have better. It makes Jousting Lance and Song of Freyalise better. Could end up splashing Grand Warlord Radha, which is a fine 4 mana 3/4 with haste. Don't think we'll need to splash the Grand Warlord, since again, splashing a 4 mana card that you preferably would want to play on curve is not always going to work out. And then I don't think we'll need a 6 mana 7/6 necessarily in this deck. And again, I don't think we'll need to run the risk of On Sarah's Wings in this particular build. And yeah, I don't really see anything else I'm too excited about. So here it's pretty much between Wild Onslaught for me and Davenant Trapper, and I'm probably gonna end up running the Davenant Trapper just to have an additional creature. So now we just have to figure out our mana base. If we're playing 17 lands with a Grow from the Ashes and a Scaring Surveyor, I think we can get away with just playing 2 mountains, which is still enough to potentially kick a Fight with Fire. We also have a Song of Freyalise that can potentially fix our mana to produce red, so that's also worth considering. So 2 mountains, and then we'll have 15 lands left, and we do have more white cards than green cards in the deck, I believe. But the green cards we have, we would preferably be able to cast early, especially Llanowar Elves, Sapling Migration in combination with Song of Freyalise, and Grow from the Ashes for mana fixing. So the mana base in the deck will be 2 mountains, 8 forests, and 7 plains, and I'm happy running 17 lands since we have the Grow from the Ashes, the Surveyor, and the Llanowar Elves, as well as the Song of Freyalise to ramp us, which is quite a lot. The nice thing about this green-white splash red deck is that we have a lot of sideboard options as well. We have multiple disenchant effects with Broken Bond and the Invoke the Divine. We have some options against aggressive decks where we can bring in the Crows and Druid to maybe gain a ton of life in the late game. We can bring in more 2-drops if we need to. We also have access to a Pierce the Sky against flyers from the opponent. So a lot of sideboard options is always nice to have in a sealed deck, where you might be facing a lot of varying strategies. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with this build. I don't think we'll end up building any other decks here. Sure, we have a Jorah, which is tempting to try and build around since it can draw us a lot of cards, but blue-red doesn't really look like an option since we don't have any creatures in either blue or red, and we don't have enough artifact creatures to make that work. So unfortunately, Jorah will have to stay in the sideboard. So yeah, just a one build this time, but there's still a few potential variations on green-white splashing red that we could play. So there's still a lot of options. So yeah, I think this is gonna do it for this video. So I wanna thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached, we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.